Zelensky was asked, if Trump gets back into office, do you think that he will support the Ukraine war effort at the same level that Biden did? And his answer was very vague. He said, well, I think if the people are with us, Trump will be with us. But I don't think very many people are on the side of the Ukraine war anymore. You know, in the beginning, everyone flew a flag, but there were no parades, there were no campus riots. It wasn't the same level that we see in Israel and Gaza. And so almost everyone I talk to is like, where's the 200 billion? Are they winning? How many people have died? I just don't think the people are with them. I don't think Trump will be with him. What are your thoughts on his comments?
Well, if President Trump were to become president again, and he were allowed to act in accordance with what he thinks is right or his political instincts, he would shut down the Ukrainian war immediately. But remember that he's a prisoner of his donors. This is what people don't understand now. I'm sure you heard about this Mrs. Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, who is publicly offering, I guess this is a bribe, $100 million to the Trump campaign if he promises to underwrite and support the devastation and ethnic cleansing of the so-called West Bank, pushing all the Arabs south of the Jordan River so that greater Israel becomes a reality. And she says, if you promise to do that, then I'll give you $100 million for your campaign. Now, personally, if somebody said that to me, I would be deeply offended. And I would think every American citizen would be offended. What it effectively amounts to is, here's $100 million and you're going to perform duty as my mercenary and help me to eliminate anybody I don't like that's on my borders or in my region. But this is the way people do business now. So he's got some very powerful donors. And by the way, he's not alone. All the candidates have donors. And all of those donors have influence because they've got lots of money. The last person who is consulted is the American citizen. When's the last time we had a referendum on anything in this country? How about a referendum on the Ukraine war? We could do that, couldn't we? And you'd get a resounding no. How about we go to the Middle East and make war on everybody that Israel doesn't like? I think we'd get a resounding no. Okay. But they're never consulted, and the average American does not have the money to bribe candidates or politicians to do things. So your question is a legitimate one, but it really says something terrible about the American political system right now. We really do have the best government money can buy.
Yeah.
Well, you have to understand there's a difference between moving an embassy and going to war. First of all, and when people came to me when the Israelis moved the embassy, I said, fine. They said, well, this will offend the Arabs. I said, any country in the world has the sovereign right to place its embassy wherever its government as well as its embassy wherever they like. In other words, it's not a matter for our decision. So that was an easy thing to do. And at the time, I had no problems with it. And my own view is that any country anywhere can do the same thing. Now, having said that, going to war is a different prospect. If somebody asks you to support them for something that leads inevitably to warfare and conflict that will involve the use of American military power and American lives, that's a different one entirely. And we're now at that point. And several people call me all the time and say, well, Doug, that's why we have to have a draft, because then the American people would feel the pain. I don't think the American people are quite that inured to pain. I think Americans are always disturbed when they find out that American soldiers in some remote area are being killed. And if a large number are killed within a short period of time, they immediately say, what are we doing there? So the game historically over the last 30 years has been to minimize your casualties and work closely with the media to suppress any appreciation for what's happening and what's developing. As a result, people have been able to make policy in Washington without much constraint. This is now very, very dangerous, because in Eastern Ukraine, this whole Ukrainian project launched by the CIA in 2014 with Victoria Nuland and others is collapsing. The only thing that prevents the Russian military from advancing right now over the Dnieper River and coming south out of Belarusia and seizing Kiev is a desire on the part of Moscow to end the war. They would rather negotiate an end to this thing. They just want Ukraine to be neutral, and they'll stipulate those conditions, something on the Austrian state model that worked so well in 1955. But if that's continually rejected, then what do you do if you're in Moscow to end this thing? Exactly what I just described. You cross the river, you take Kiev, you move down to Odessa, and you call it a day and make clear that if anybody crosses into Western Ukraine, that you can target them and destroy them, which they can do right now. If you or I walked across the border from Poland into Ukraine right now, and you and I were on some sort of list of priority intelligence topics, and they saw us, they could pick us up as soon as we crossed into Russia, and they could launch a missile to kill us. I mean, this is the world we live in right now. You have persistent surveillance. Everybody can watch everybody else all the time. The only way to stop that is to destroy space-based surveillance. But if you do that, then eventually they'll get around to destroying yours, and then nobody has any surveillance of anything. And that's very dangerous because of the ICBMs. We rely very heavily on our space-based surveillance to also protect us against the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile that could destroy millions. And the Russians do the same thing. So there are limits to how far you can go. Let's put it this way. And we keep pushing those limits. And if we push far enough, we'll get much worse than what we bargained for. And that's where we are right now in Ukraine. And by the way, it's the same problem in Israel. You know, people are being evacuated from parts of Israel that are within range of Hezbollah, its rockets, its weapons, and even its troops. It's getting worse. Israel is in serious trouble. This really needs to stop, this war. But for them, stopping equals defeat, so they won't. There's not a whole lot we can do. We have no influence whatsoever over Netanyahu. He has much more influence over our government and our armed forces than we do right now. And when it comes to Russia, we continue to pretend that it doesn't make any difference what they say. We stick by the original lie that hatched the whole plan. We keep insisting that Russia is losing. I mean, Russia will still be losing, I'm quite sure, when they're sitting on the Polish border fishing in the river. This is insane, but this is where we are. So I think it is useful to say, what if President Trump gets in? What if you get somebody other than the current crew? And I think almost anybody who comes along will quickly put an end to the Ukraine war. It just makes no sense. It's a waste of time, money, and resources. The Europeans have had it. The Scholz government's in real trouble. And once that government in Berlin goes, there'll be more flexibility. Although I would also argue something else, and people don't understand this. When you've had so much trouble, so much conflict, so much corruption, and you get a new government, everyone expects the new government to fix everything immediately. It never happens. So they don't last. You'll go through 2 or 3 iterations before you finally get to a place where everyone is comfortable. So on the one hand, I'm grateful that these European powers are now in political turmoil because they need it. They really do. They need new governments. But we can't expect everything there to change immediately. But one thing that I think will happen is this war in eastern Ukraine will end. It's ridiculous. It's so destructive. The problem then is turning to Israel. And I don't see how anybody gets control of Israel other than Washington. And Washington is on the payroll. Everybody there is on the payroll. They're profiting from their support of the lobby. And so I see nothing changing there. And that's very, very dangerous for the future of Israel.
Yeah. When you used your hypothetical of you and I crossing the border from Poland into Ukraine, I learned this last week that I'm actually on Zelensky's kill list. I'm sure you're on it as well.
Yeah.
So I'll never be going to Ukraine because telling the truth about the Ukraine war has now put my life in danger. So
Well,
I'm
the sad
sure.
part is, that, and I don't know much about it, no one wants to be on someone's death list. But in this day and age, if you take any position that contradicts the mainstream view or conventional wisdom, you're on somebody's death list somewhere. The bad news is that I'm told this death list is run out of Langley, which is closely aligned with and tied to the SBU, the secret police in Ukraine, the equivalent of the KGB in Soviet times. So, the thing that's disturbing is that we're too deeply involved with foreign countries, foreign interests, foreign actors. I think it was John Mearsheimer who recently made the observation: if it were in our interest to do whatever Mr. Netanyahu wants, there would be no Israel lobby. He wouldn't need it. But the fact is that we're acting against our own interests in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. So you have to ask the question, why are we acting against our own interests? And it goes back to money. Who are the big donors? Who are the people with all the money? How do they reach people? How do they contact them? How do they get them elected? And how do they block others from being elected? This is what the game is about now.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on those 51 that knowingly misled the American people? Should they have their security clearance removed?
Oh, I absolutely would pull their clearance. That's the least that you can do. And then I would put together a prosecution and go after them, because they betrayed the trust of the American people. This is the big problem. When you take an oath in the Department of Defense or in the military, you swear to uphold the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to obey the orders of the officers appointed over you. Well, there's a conflict there. On the one hand, you're supposed to obey the officers appointed over you, and you're supposed to simultaneously be true to the Constitution. What happens if obeying the officers violates your loyalty and oath to the Constitution? We've got to resolve this, because this is not unique to the CIA. This is a problem that runs across the entire federal government. But I think the CIA is one of these organizations that deserves a lot more attention than it gets. There's practically no oversight. The budget is a very vague thing. We can't really audit it effectively. It's even worse in some respects than the Department of Defense. It's a black hole. It's been a rogue organization for many, many years. I don't know who is behind all 51 of those officers, but obviously they signed that assuming two things. First of all, I'm violating my oath by aligning myself politically with something as opposed to simply doing my job as an intelligence analyst. And then secondly, I'm probably doing what the people above me want me to do. Now, undoubtedly, much like you see in the Department of Defense, the people that want to be generals and admirals, they unquestioningly obey everything. And if you want them to be diversity conscious, equity conscious, you name it, they're, oh, yes, please pick me. I'll enforce all those dumb policies. Oh, yes, I'll promote everybody regardless of any demonstrated character or competence. They could be idiots, and I'll vote for them if you tell me that's what I need to do.